we're going to read a portion in the Parsha from Behaalotcha about Yisro. But here Yisro is identified with a different name. He's called Chovav. Chovav is also another name. The Chazal tell us that there are 10 different names for Yisro, and this is one of them. So he says, so Moshe says to Chovav, as it says in Perek Yud Pasuk Chavtes, he says, Vayomer Moshe leChovav ben Reuel Amidjani Chosein Moshe. He says to his father-in-law, Noseim anachnu el hamakom asher amar Hashem oso etein lachem. We're about to travel. Remember, this is before the sin of the spies. So Moshe thinks that we're imminently going to be going into Eretz Yisrael. L'cha yitavnu vehitavnu lach ki Hashem diver tov al Yisrael. Come with us, father-in-law, and we will do good for you. Because God has spoken good for the Jewish people. So if you stick with us, whatever good we can accomplish, you'll be part of that. So Pasuk Lamed says, Vayomer elav lo eleich, ki im el artzi ve'el moladeti eleich. I will not go. I'm going back to my birthplace, to my country. Lamed Aleph, Vayomer al na ta'azov osan. Please, father-in-law, do not forsake us. Ki al kein yadata chanosenu BaMidbar. Because after all, you know how we've encamped in the desert. V'hayisalanu le'einayim, and you will be for us as eyes. You'll provide a vision for us, is really what he's saying. V'haya kiseileich imanu, v'haya hatov hahu asher yetiv Hashem imanu, v'hitavnu lach. He says, if you go with us, whatever good that God does for us, we will be able to return and give it to you as well. That's the end of the story. We don't even know what happens to Chovav / Yisro at this part of the story. Now, there's a big controversy among the commentaries when historically this story takes place. We know that there's another story about Moshe's father-in-law in Parshas Yisro, and at the end, you know the story. It's a famous story where Yisro comes to visit Moshe in the desert, and this is recorded as happening before Matan Torah, and there he sees Moshe sitting, and all the people are coming to visit him, to ask him shaylas. And he suggests to Moshe that he should change the whole way in which the people come to speak to him and ask him questions. And Moshe listens to his father-in-law. And then at the very end of the story, it says, the very famous pasuk in source number 2 from Parshas Yisro, a totally different part of the Torah, Vayishalach Moshe escho seno vayelech lo el artzo, that Moshe sent his father-in-law home, and he went back to his land, which of course is what they always teach us when you become a father-in-law, is that when you give advice to your son-in-law, it's time to go home. But that's exactly what happens over here. Is that Yisro gives the son-in-law advice, and then his son-in-law sends him home. Right? So that's the first thing you need to remember, is keep your mouth shut. But in all seriousness, the question now is, how do these two stories jive with each other? Are these two separate episodes? Are they the same story? There's a machlokus in the Meforshim whether this is the same story just being revisited, or whether it's a totally different story. So one school says that this is actually the same story, but just from a different perspective, that it happens that Yisro came to visit Moshe, and Moshe says to him, you know what? Come, stay with us. We're about to receive the Torah. That's the Tov that Moshe is talking about. And then after we receive the Torah, we're going to go to Eretz Yisrael. And Yisro demurs, and he says, I want to go back to my land. And so Moshe sends him on his way. So the two stories really jive together. But there's another version that says that, no, these are two separate episodes. Moshe Rabbeinu was first visited by Yisro before Matan Torah. And then he told Yisro, we're about to engage in a revelation that only those who were enslaved in Egypt and are God's people are going to be able to partake of. It is, the Rabbeinu Bechaya quotes a pasuk in Mishlei. It says, Leiv Yodea Maras Nafsho Ubesimchaso Lo Yisarev Zar. That only a person who's gone through bitterness can truly understand what he's experiencing. And when it's time for him to rejoice, no stranger may mingle in. In other words, if you haven't suffered with us, you cannot be part of the sublime joy of what we're about to experience with Matan Torah. So therefore, Moshe has to send his father-in-law away, but says, it's only temporary, father-in-law. After Matan Torah is over, come back, and then, we'll spend some more time together. And then this is the second episode where Yisro says, it's time for me to go back home. And this is articulated in some of the Meforshim on the Mechilta. The Or HaChaim sort of alludes to it. He quotes the Mechilta, but it's actually the Meforshim on the Mechilta itself say this more explicitly. But he quotes the Mechilta as a machlokus between Rabbi Yehoshua, this is in source number 3, as a machlokus between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Elazar HaModai. He says, Rabbi Yehoshua Omer Shalcho Mikvodo Shel Olam. That Rabbi Yehoshua says that the reason why Moshe had to send Yisro away was because there was going to be something called Kvodo Shel Olam. The greatest glory of the world was going to come down now in the presence of the Jewish people atop Har Sinai, and it was therefore necessary to send him away because he could not be privy to that immense experience. But Rabbi Eliezer HaModai Omer, Amarlo, that Rabbi Eliezer HaModai says, no, it wasn't that Moshe had to send him away, get rid of him, so to speak, but rather Yisro himself felt that he didn't belong anymore. And what was his argument? His argument was, Klum haner mehaneh ela b'makom hachoshech. Ma ani mehaneh ben chama ulevana. Listen, beautiful words. He says, when you have a candle does not provide light when there already is a huge amount of sunlight already. If you light a candle in the middle of the day, you're not helping anyone, right? The only time that a candle is of help is in the middle of darkness, is amidst darkness. He says, if I stay here, there's Moshe, there's Aharon, there's Yehoshua. You've already got the sun and the moon shining brightly within the Jewish camp. What do I have to contribute? And therefore, Ella ani holech la'artzi, umegayer kol b'nei medina va'aviem lilmod v'chulei. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to Midyan. I'm going to proselytize all of the members of my nation. I'll be the little candle, right? I'll do my outreach work out in the hinterlands where people are still pagans, and I'll light the candle and try to ignite some souls. Yochol halach v'lo asa kain. Now, was Yisro successful or was he unsuccessful? So therefore we read in Sefer Shoftim uvnei Keni that the descendants of the Keni, which is where Yisro were living, expressed fealty and loyalty to the Jewish people. So you see that Yisro succeeded. He wasn't megayer in the formal sense of making them Jews, but he did proselytize people to recognize and acknowledge the God of Israel and the importance of the Jewish people. So you have two different perspectives here. You have the perspective of Rabbi Yehoshua that Yisro had to leave because he couldn't be privy to Matan Torah. And you have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer HaModai, who, according to some opinions, would explain that Yisro came after Matan Torah, but still opted not to stay with the Jewish people, not because he had to leave, but because he felt that if I want to be involved with outreach to the world, I got to get out there. So Yisro, according to Rabbi Eliezer HaModai, is the first kiruv professional. He's the first person who engages in kiruv rechokim. There's a need for him to get out there and to be able to spread the word of God to the uninitiated and to help people recognize what it means to be God. Actually, Avraham Avinu was the first outreach professional, but Yisro is following in the footsteps of Avraham Avinu in this respect. Okay? Good? So far, so good? Okay, so my only question to you is, so why does Moshe persist? Why does Moshe say, stay with us? What was Moshe's counter-argument to Yisro? Yisro is saying something very good. And you see that the Torah doesn't even resolve the debate. The Torah doesn't say, like Yisro, came back to Moshe and said, what you're saying is wrong, and then finally Moshe agrees, yeah, you're better off going out to do kiruv with your little candle. The Torah just says that it spends more time on recording Moshe Rabbeinu's argument, which is You after all know all of the things we've experienced, you'll be for us as eyes, which is very nebulous. What does that mean? What I want us to try and appreciate is, what's the benefit of my holding my little candle and still remaining part of the Jewish camp? Okay, let's take a look at the Mahari Assad, who was a Hungarian a great rabbi in the beginning of the 19th century. And he writes as follows.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Is it not possible that Moshe was just trying to be loving to his father-in-law?
Yeah, but you can be loving and be insincere, and you can be loving and sincere. If he was just trying to be loving, then we have to understand what his argument was. If the Torah records his argument, then there's something sincere there. There's something substantive to his supplication that his father-in-law stay with him. Why would the Torah record Moshe Rabbeinu's words of pressure that he was putting on his father-in-law if they weren't really real?
No,
if they were just a way of...
I'm saying they were real, but maybe the Torah is trying to teach us that you should go out of your way to try to...
But what was the argument? We have to understand, why was he trying to hold his father-in-law back if his father-in-law said, I have vital work to do? My work is more important than us staying together as a family. Why would Moshe stand in his way? Moshe would say, I hear you. What you're doing is God's work out in the world. God bless you. That's what he should have said. So what is the counter-argument?
Rabbi?
Yes?
I'm sorry, but so it comes to my mind, Megillah Ruth. So it's like kind of the opposite, not like Ruth says, I'm going to follow you, and here Yisro says, I'm going to spread the word, and Naomi says, no, don't go away, I don't want you with me, and she says, no, I'm going with you, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, come with me, and so it's like two different, like it's like
right.
the father-in-law and the mother-in-law.
Oh.
Right. Oh, very good. Very good. Very interesting contrast that you're creating. Yeah. See, in the case of Ruth, she was being megayer. She was trying to express her insistence on becoming part of the Jewish people. Yisro, it seems, was already initiated by according to Rabbi Eliezer Modeh, he already was megayer. And he said, I am so completely committed to the Jewish people that now my job is to try and get the rest of the world to learn that message. Ruth lived at a time when that didn't seem to be possible. It wasn't a time when she could go out to the Moabite world and convince them to accept God. It was a different time, different place. But here you're dealing with right after the Jews get out of Egypt, after Matan Torah, the world is glorious, and the Jews are on top. It was like 1967 all over again in the biblical period. Right? Okay, let's take a look at what he says. Vayomer al na ta'azov osanu ki al ken yadata chanosenu BaMidbar v'hayisa lanu le'enayim v'haya hatov hahu asher yitiv Hashem imanu v'hitabnu lach. He's just first quoting from the Psukim. What was Moshe's argument? Hadikdukim rabu, he says. I apologize if you don't read the Rashi text. I'll just translate everything. He says there are many problems with this text, and we need to understand what it means. Menira li. But what would seem to me, he says, Dihinei HaKadosh Baruch Hu oseh tamid nisim in bnei Adam. God is constantly doing miracles for people. But what's the problem? Avolo kol echad makir b'niso. Not everyone is capable of seeing the constant miracles that are occurring all around him or her. V'yeshnam bnei Adam. There are some people who mistakenly think that everything occurs by the way of natural order. There's no such thing as divine providence. There's no such thing as miracles. Everything is nature. Velo chali velo margish kihu nivra demare saye. Kihu gavra rather demare saye. And people don't recognize that they are constantly receiving divine aid. Kideita v'chazal, as the Gemara actually tells us, this amazing story. Ma'isa be'echad sheratza leilech lemedinas hayam bishvil masa umatan. There was once a man who wanted to seek out his fortune in a faraway country. V'terem sheyarad el hasfina, and so he had to take a boat for passage. Before he gets on the boat, yashav lo kotes beraglo, he gets this huge splinter in his foot, and it probably gets infected. So he can't. He's got to miss his boat trip because he's got this infection. And so the ship leaves without him, and he's cursing himself and very, very upset that he missed the boat. Liyamim shama shenitrafa sfina bayam v'samach ma'od. Later he hears that the boat sank, so he's very happy. There was a Twilight Zone that based itself on this Gemara. Anyway, v'hu lo yada she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu asa lo nes bazeh. What he didn't realize is that God really did a miracle for him. V'sivev sheyashav lo kotz biraglo ela chashav mikrehu. So initially he didn't realize that getting a splinter in your foot and getting an infection could possibly be something that was involved with divine providence. But it's only after the fact that people realize that everything that happens in life is for a reason. Everything is for a reason. So he says, therefore, like this. He says, V'hinei ben adam hayodea umakir shehakadosh baruch hu osei onisim. On the other hand, if a person is constantly aware that God does miracles for him, bevadai lo yomar al rechusho v'kinyano kochi va'otzem yadi asali hachayil hazeh. He surely will not say that, well, it's all because of my initiative and my efforts that I became the person that I am today. V'dein garma she'yitain gam tzedakah la'acherim biyodo she'im hu yitain la'acherim HaKadosh Baruch Hu yachzor v'yitain lo. And furthermore, such a person, because he sees that God does everything for him, has no problem giving tzedakah, because he realizes God only gave me tzedakah so that I could share it with others, and this way God will give me more so I can continue sharing with others. But if a person thinks that everything goes by nature or by chance or by chaos, by random, and therefore if I am wealthy it's because I worked hard for it, the person thinks I earned it fair and square, he's not going to share tzedakah with others. He'll say, go get a job just like I did. But don't you realize that Hashem showed favor to you and put you in a position where you're able to have this wealth? Don't you realize that that person never was presented with the same set of circumstances that were unique to your experience? And that's why he never had the same chances and opportunities as you. Right? So, V'hinei b'nei Yisrael b'yotam BaMidbar, haya HaKadosh Baruch Hu manhigam b'nisim geluyim chutz l'derech haTeva. Now let's go talk about the Jewish people in the desert. They were privy to all kinds of overt miracles that completely traversed the rules, the laws of nature. V'yadua dehergel na'aseh teva. The problem with that is that when you are privy to miracles on a constant basis, you start to become impervious and callous to them. So because the Jews received man every single day of their lives, so a lot of Jews felt, okay, so where's the man? The man today was a little stale. The man today was too crunchy, it was too hard, right? People would start to complain about the most amazing miracles. Like this one comedian talks about how he took a flight and he says, you talk to people after they get off an airplane and you ask them, how was your flight? And they say, oh, it was the worst experience of my life. I had to sit on the tarmac for 45 minutes before we took off. And what about the fact that afterwards, when you took off, you were flying through the air incredibly at 35,000 feet? Does that not affect you at all? That the miracle of modern man, of flight, and that you were able to get from one coast to the other coast in 5 hours, does that not make any impression upon you at all? You said if people were really thinking about the miracle of flight, every moment that they'd be sitting in their chair, they would say, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in the air. But we don't think about those things anymore because it's such a part of the normal human experience. Go in the air, what's the big deal? Below Yargishu was our grandparents. Could you imagine our grandparents seeing us on an airplane? It took 2 weeks to get from Minsk to Pinsk, right? On a horse. And maybe you wouldn't even survive the trip because it was on a long winter journey. He says, V'lo yargishu bazeh she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu manhigam b'nisim chutz min haTeva. And people don't even realize that God is guiding us miraculously. And even the Jews in the desert might not have even felt that after a while. And that's why Moshe says to Yisro, you are a precious resource for the Jewish people. Please don't leave us. And if you ask, Why are we putting pressure on you to stay? Lekach amar ki ata yadata chanosenu BaMidbar. He says, because you know what kind of experience we're going through in the desert. Dahainu mikivan shata incha murgal kol kach b'nisim v'lo yadata rak chanosenu BaMidbar. He says, you were never part of the Exodus experience. You never saw the 10 plagues. You never saw the splitting of the Red Sea. All you see in the middle of your life, as an old man already, you see the miraculous phenomena that we're experiencing on a daily basis in the desert. And that's why, because you didn't see the whole scope of miracles, and you were living a more prosaic, normal, ordinary life up until now, you can be a new set of eyes for us. You're the guy that's going to say, oh my gosh, you got mun today again? I can't believe it. Right? So instead of the Jews, some Jews saying, oh, mun again, Yisro would come by and say, I can't, it's unbelievable. This is a miracle. And that would be the new set of eyes that would be provided for the Jewish people. And that would prevent the Jews from being able to say, it's my might and my strength, etc. And that way, we'll be able to give charity. And charity is the example. It's the attitude that we would have, that everything that we have is from Hashem, so we're able to share with others more freely. We're able to celebrate our lives and realize that we're just merely the recipients of great gifts. And therefore, when you are able to provide this new insight with us, then whatever goodness we have, we'll share with you, because you'll inspire us to want to give and share of our goodness with others. That's what Moshe wanted Yisro to stick around for. He says, we always need a fresh set of eyes within the Jewish people. There's so much kvetching that we have within our community. When you have a person who's a Baal Tshuva, or a person who's a ger, who comes into the Jewish community and provides this sense of freshness and says, it's unbelievable that there is such a high percentage of nuclear families within the Jewish community. That husbands and wives, for the most part, stay married, and their children, for the most part, get a higher education, and they end up getting married and stay connected with their parents, and they don't get their bodies pierced and tattoos from head to toe, and they're living normal lives, and they're productive people, and they talk to each other, and they sit down at a Shabbos table, and they have meaningful conversations. This is amazing. That's incredible. But we take it for granted, and we say, yeah, my son's not motivated because, he's the girl he's seeing, maybe she's... The guy says, what are you talking about? She's Jewish. Yeah. She's a lovely, nice girl. She comes from a good family. Yeah, but they use a plastic tablecloth on Shabbos. Or whatever. So you follow me? Am I communicating with you? Right? So if you have a fresh set of eyes, that can provide perspective on the amazing lives that the Jewish people have, that is an inspiration to the Jewish people. And so the Jewish people always need that Yisro who's going to hold that little candle. He says, yes, it's true. Yisro, you may not be able to influence people like the great Gedolim, like Moshe and Aaron, but you can influence people in a way that even Moshe and Aaron can't do, because you provide fresh perspective. And we should be looking for those people in our community. We should be having those people at our Shabbos table, and we should be learning from them and appreciating that when a person sees Judaism for the first time and sees the tremendous benefits of being a Jew for the first time, we can truly be inspired by that person. This past Shabbos, I went over time, I'm sorry. We'll talk about it more later. Have a great day. So this past Shabbos, we had a freshly minted Ger Tzedek at our table, who grew up on a farm somewhere that I never heard of in northern Ontario. Right? And he was loving Shabbos in a way that I hadn't loved in such a long time. And I was able to relive the excitement of Shabbos through his eyes. And that's why I was grateful that he was at my Shabbos dinner. Okay, have a good day, everybody.